Hey there, welcome to First Look. Thanks for being here this time. I'm actually walking and I'm in Frick Park, or on the edge of it anyway. And this week we're talking about, before I forget the passage because I don't have it on me, so the text this week is Mark 8:27 through 38. So at some point I will tell you to pause the video and read that. You can pause it right now if you want to, but that'll be what we're reading for this week. So this week is special, mostly just from a Northmont perspective, because it's our picnic, and so I hope that many of you get a chance to be with us at our picnic. We're going to be at the lodge in North Park. It's at 11 a.m. instead of our regular 10 a.m. Because it moves right into like a lunch. We're gonna do some tie-dyeing, so if you're coming, bring a chair, bring whatever the deacons told you to bring, and make sure that you bring something to tie-dye, ideally. I'll have the other supplies, but you'll need like the t-shirt or the pillowcase or the socks or whatever you're gonna do, but I'll bring the other stuff. So just thought it might be a good like thing we could all do. You'll tie-dye something, you put it in a bag, and then I'll give you instructions on what to do with it whenever you get home. And if you can't be there, my plan, barring some issue, my plan is to record a version of the service, meaning at least the liturgy and the sermon, at some point before Sunday morning. So hopefully you'll at least get a chance to be a part of the worship service in some way, because recording outside is difficult and awkward, and so let's not do that part. So we'll do it inside, and it'll just be you and I talking. So anyway, that's the plan for this coming week. So we've been kind of going back and forth a little bit, but this week we get a chance to get back into the gospel. And again, this is Mark 8:27 through 38. And it's a pretty familiar passage. It's Jesus talking about who he is, and a little bit more about what will happen as a result of who he is. So this might be a good chance to pause, actually. If you want to pause and come back, then that's fine. But anyway, you can just, I want you to, it's good for you to have read it before I talk about it. So the passage that maybe you just read it starts off the first section talking about Jesus trying to discuss with his disciples, who do people say that I am? And he says, well, eventually it says, you're the Messiah. Some people you say you're this, some people say you're this, but we know you are the Messiah. And he says, okay, kind of keep that in, keep it to yourself, or, hold on to that. So then the last part of the passage talks about who Jesus is, and then by extension, what that will mean for the disciples. So the first thing is, Jesus says, so since I'm the Messiah, I will suffer greatly and will be crucified. And, it talks about his death. And of course, the disciples have a hard time hearing that, for all the obvious reasons that you would have a hard time hearing that, which is, you're following Jesus, you're devoting your life to him, and this is what he says is going to happen to him, right? And then on the next part of that, what happens is then he starts talking about what will happen to them as the result of them following him. That you have to lose yourself, that you have to bear your cross, and that you basically have to be willing to give up everything in order to follow Jesus. Meaning nothing is going to be the same after you follow him. And that's the basic premise of the passage. And it's a pretty important statement, especially when you think about where they were in the journey. Because Mark chapter 8 is about halfway in between Mark, or halfway down the road in Mark, right? So we've got about half of it. And so there's still time to go, and they haven't gotten to Jerusalem or Holy Week or any of those things yet. And Jesus is forecasting, even though he is the Messiah, and he says it to them, so they internalize it, think about it. He lets them know, hey, listen, this is going to end in me dying, and it's going to end with you having to be different than the way that you see yourselves currently, the way you live currently. All that is going to change. All of that will need to be put down so that you can be this. So that would have said a lot to this group of people. And the first thing, of course, it would have said was, this is not going to be what I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be this kind of entry into a new physical kingdom. I thought that we were going to be rulers. I thought that we were going to lead. I thought that those who were here would be out and that we would be in, and that would be something that was new and different. Where instead, that's not what happens at all. And Jesus is saying that's not what's going to happen at all. And so they have to kind of get their minds around that. And they don't, really. I think that there's a lot of different ways that they could have seen that, I guess. Maybe they meant eventually this would happen. Or maybe metaphorically it would happen. Or maybe they just thought that maybe he was saying it because it's something they needed to hear, even if it wasn't what was going to happen. But it certainly would have scared people to think about, I'm devoting my life to this one who I think of, or I understand as being the Messiah, and he's telling me that it's going to come to an end, and that I'm not in for a life of comfort or power. I'm in for a life where everything I know will change, and there will be no more status quo. And if I'm going to continue down this road of following him, then it's going to mean hardship, and it's going to mean maybe a world I don't recognize now. And so I called the sermon, I think something like The Line Between Love and Hate, something like that. And the reason I did that was because I imagined myself trying to tease out and think about what does it mean for us to, challenge status quo thinking in order to be those who follow Jesus, but also what does it mean for us to not follow Jesus according to status quo thinking? Meaning like, where is it that we need to recognize that we are those who have a misconception of what it means to follow Jesus, and we're the ones who aren't seeing him the right way. But then, of course, we're also called to consider how we can be those who embrace the fact that we can't live in that way either. At least we're not called to. I think one of the hard things about that is that the first thing that we're inclined to do, which is what I think the disciples were inclined to do, was to try to say, okay, how am I living now? I need to move over because there's a person coming on a bike, I think. How am I living now? And what does that mean? How do I follow Jesus while not being someone who has to fundamentally change the way that I live now? Meaning, how do I rationalize my thoughts and actions, mode of operation? How do I justify how I already think to align Jesus with that thinking, with that mode of operation, with that kind of living, so that I can think of myself as righteous, stay on the same path that I'm on, and never waver from that. Just use this piece of scripture, use Jesus' words to confirm and affirm my lifestyle. That way, I never have to really do anything. Clearly, Jesus agrees with me. Clearly, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, how I'm acting, how I spend this or do this or decide this is right. So, how do I read this passage to make it so that I don't really have to change anything, but I can judge other people for them not changing things, which is really what I want. I want to stay the same, and I want everyone else to think like me, to act like me, to vote like me, to spend money like I do, to think of me as, the person who has it right. And hopefully everyone else will just figure out that they're doing it wrong. And so that means if that's kind of the message to Jesus and the disciples, Jesus to the disciples, then it's the message to us also. And that kind of self-reflection and accountability is one of those things that I think is extraordinarily hard to do, because you are probably getting many things right. But then there's other things you're getting wrong. But then how do you decipher which ones am I getting right and which ones am I getting wrong? I mean, that's where I land, at least more often than not. I think about the way that I do my life, and I think about the daily choices. Some of those daily choices are about how I act in relationships, with you, with congregation members, with my family, with friends. Who am I in those relationships? And I think about, who am I to myself? How do I treat myself? How do I treat, I am just as beautifully and wonderfully made as you are. And so, how do I treat myself with as much care and compassion as I do another person? And then, of course, I think about my own choices. I get up and, I know how much I pay for housing, and I know how much I pay for, food, and I know how much I, pay for a car, and I know how much I, what decisions I make about, the kind of food I eat. I'm somewhere between, I'm like right on the cusp of millennial and Gen X. So of course, all I eat is avocado toast. And so how much of that do I eat, and how much of that am I consuming in a day? You consider all those things. And then you consider what else goes into your body or into your mind. What do I take in on a daily basis? What television or what news or what opinions or what, criticism do I take in on a daily basis? How much anxiety do I deal with? How much depressive thoughts do I deal with? How much guilt do I deal with? You consume a lot of those things. And so then Jesus basically says to us, put things down and pick up the cross and follow me. And again, that sounds really simple or at least straightforward. Maybe not simple, but straightforward. Until you start considering, well, what does that mean for me? What do I literally put down? Does it mean put down absolutely everything? Become a blank slate? Pick up the cross and follow Jesus? Maybe. But if I am going to do that, and assuming that I'm going to continue to have a job, have a family, and live in a society, I could decide not to, right? I could decide, hey, this is my last video. I'm signing off. I'll be leaving everyone behind, and I'll be living somewhere here in the park. I could do that. And maybe that's what Jesus is calling me to, but I don't think so. Mostly because I didn't see Jesus escape from the world, right? Engaged in the world. So what does that mean for me every day? At least my perspective on it is that it means every single decision I make, thinking through it critically. So sometimes I'll see something in the news or in a conversation, and it'll make me really upset. So I'll have this sort of knee-jerk reaction on, hey, this shouldn't have happened, or you shouldn't have talked to me that way, or you shouldn't have talked to that person that way, or whatever the case is. And I would say most of the time, I am probably better off, or the people around me are better off, if I don't react right away. Sometimes, in hindsight, I wish I had. I wish that I had spoken up or said something in a timely way that would have, either supported someone who needed supported, or wouldn't have allowed someone to kind of get away with saying or doing something that kind of allows them to continue bad behavior. But more often than not, I am better off taking a beat, thinking about it for a minute, and then reacting later. But I think that, so in that vein, I guess is what I'm saying, it is good for me to be someone who is willing to look at every piece of what I'm doing and try to recognize that the way that I'm doing it has, if best case scenario, flaws, and worst case scenario is completely off base. And I've gone through several kind of checks for myself. And I don't know if these are perfect, but they are the things I consider. And so if we're looking at this text and we're thinking about what does it mean for me to, to recognize that following Jesus means putting down certain things, picking up certain things, and knowing the difference between the things I put down and the things I pick up, then what are the good barometers for that? Even if I'm not going to follow it perfectly, what's the good litmus test for whether I think what I'm doing is faithful? Okay. Things I would consider. one, if I'm looking at it from a faith perspective, over and over and over again, I try to consider not any one particular text or passage, but I try to think about and consider overarchingly, over and over and over again. Right? If I had 30 seconds to explain to someone who didn't know who Jesus was, or what Scripture means, or what salvation is, or any of those things, if I had 30 seconds to describe and boil that down, what would I say? Based on all of that I've read, all of that I've heard, all of that I've seen. And so I try to analyze for myself when making decisions or when trying to consider who I should be or what I should say or any of those things. What do I consistently hear about who God is? Who is God? God is these 3 or 4 traits. Who does God say that I should be over and over and over again? Not in one place, but over and over and over and over again. And then, what does God say about how I should respond over and over and over and over again? Right? So looking at that with as much consistency as possible. So in trying to figure out how to be that person, it's who is God, who am I, and what am I supposed to do over and over and over again. The other one that I consider the most often is, and you've heard me say this, I think, often, is what seems like the most loving thing to do. And what is the most loving thing to do is not always the most convenient thing to do, or the most profitable thing to do, or sometimes the safest thing to do, but is what I think, based on those 3 things I just said, who God is, who am I, what am I supposed to do, I think is faithful because it's an expression, a loving expression of how I think about the world and who I am in it. So what is the most loving thing to do this minute? And if I can be honest with myself and say that out loud and recognize it, then I hope that I'm on the right path. And then I think the other thing that I try to consider when I'm making a decision for myself, trying to parse out what do I pick up, what do I put down, is how will this benefit someone who isn't as fortunate as I am? Because if I make every decision thinking, well, someday I might be stronger or more privileged or more rich or more something, so I'll make decisions sort of aspirationally, because I think, that's who I want to be, and so I should make decisions that will either put me or other people who are in a more privileged position than I am in a better spot. I could make that decision, or I could make a decision or have an opinion or do something that I think will ultimately benefit people who are in a worse position than I am, or a harder position than I am, or have been treated worse by society than I have been. Then that's probably the decision I should make. I shouldn't act out of self-interest or aspirational interest, right? I should act out of a place of what will lift other people up instead of what will potentially lift me up or bring me to a higher place. And if I can go through things like that over and over and over again and consistently think that way, then if nothing else, I feel like I have done what I understand to be the best way of thinking. That doesn't mean it is the best way of thinking. It just means that that's what everything I just talked about leads me to. Who is God? Who am I? What am I supposed to do? What is the most loving thing? All of that leads me to thinking that I should be putting people who are either younger, more vulnerable, or in a worse socioeconomic, cultural, ethnic position in a better position. And so whatever decision I make goes along with that. And if you think through that over and over and over again, hopefully that means that we create a better society and better relationships, and we do what is faithful. I think that's about all I have for today. That's kind of where this passage led me. It may have led you somewhere completely different, which is fine. But I'm thinking about that a lot right now. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope to see you on Sunday. If you have any questions about what to bring or where to go, or you need directions or any of those things, there is, this is an ADA friendly facility. And so there is that. But if you need anything in terms of like how to get there, or what, anything that might make your experience optimal, please let us know, and we want to do that. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for doing all of this. Thanks for continuing to kind of listen to my ramblings, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time for another First Look. So until then, take care.